this whole sort of picture of awe and wonder that scientists can attest to, if that's spirituality, well then I'm spiritual too, and there's really nothing left out. There is something left out. Okay, that is not, that whole picture, as valid as that is in terms of describing the scientific impulse and rather ordinary experiences of beauty in the world, that is not what a mystic, a real mystic or contemplative experiences after his 10th year in the cave doing nothing but meditate. I mean, that is not the highest possibility of human consciousness being attested to by all of the religiously confused people over the ages who have talked about being one with the universe. There is another, there's a spectrum of experience that we have to acknowledge that many, many millions of people have experienced, that is a hell of a lot more interesting in the end and transforming of the human personality than just being in awe at the beauty of nature. So atheists deny this at their peril, because people who have had these experiences know that it's not, they're not being captured by this language of what a beautiful sunset. So my argument is that we have to avoid pseudoscience and we have to avoid pseudo-spirituality. We have to just become interested in the full spectrum of human experience and talk about it rationally. Question from Railboy. Who has offered the most level-headed and persuasive arguments against the claims you make in the moral landscape? I'm just finishing the rest of that question. Railboy has been extremely disappointed by the kind of level of criticism of it. As have I. There actually has not been an argument against the case I make in the moral landscape that I have found even momentarily destabilizing. All of the difficulties that my argument runs into, I feel like I raised in the book, and much of the criticism I've gotten has been from people who either have not read the book or have read it badly. I mean, there have been a few nits to pick, obviously, as there are with any book, but the big sort of hard swing criticism that I've gotten has been from people, for the most part, who've just missed the point somehow. And undoubtedly, some of the fault lies with me. I mean, if I were a better writer or a better communicator of these ideas, well then, I would have fewer problems. So it's one of the things you get when you write controversial books hammered into you is just how hard it is to communicate successfully with people about loaded topics. And this notion of science ultimately absorbing our talk about the good life, about values, is an incredibly scary idea for many people, and even many people who should be able to parse what I'm saying without getting emotionally hijacked. So I've just run into the full gauntlet of pushback and misunderstanding that you get when you introduce a taboo, as I did with my books on religion. So anyway, I share your disappointment, Railboy. A question about being able to reason people out of their beliefs. This is Steak Music, and it seems like there were a few more questions on this point. Whether you can ever successfully reason someone out of their beliefs when they didn't get these beliefs by reason in the first place. This is something I actually run into a lot, where people imagine that no one ever changes their mind, that it's incredibly difficult to reason with people, and it is, and yet I see the evidence of people changing their minds all the time. I've received emails by the thousands of people from people who were at one point fundamentalists, and I've even received emails from fundamentalist ministers who have completely lost their faith, but who are still functioning as ministers because they can't figure out what else to do with their lives. I mean, it's kind of flabbergasting that anyone's in this situation, but multiple people like that actually have been interviewed by Dan Dennett now and some of his students. So you hear from people who have gone just made the full tour from Bible thumping literacy to absolute certainty that they were wrong. What you don't tend to find, however, is people doing that in real time. You never really see the evidence of people changing their mind in response to counter evidence and counter argument in real time under pressure. People tend to want to change their minds in private, and I understand that because it's sort of embarrassing to admit that you were wrong. But people do change their minds, and they do it based on some kind of collision with evidence and rationality, or the evidence of other people's bad reasoning and self-deception. When you become sensitive to all the people around you living in an echo chamber of confirmation bias and shoddy reasoning and selective cherry picking of data, it's possible to wake up and see the untenability of that, and there obviously are millions of people who have. So reason is the tool. It's the tool in the toolkit to use. I think one missing piece, which I alluded to earlier on a question about spirituality, is if all you have is reason, if all you have is the talk of science and debunking of religious belief, and it's all framed in basically a denial of the character of people's experience or the legitimacy of their experience, then you have a problem, because people know they've had certain experiences. They have a admittedly fallacious set of beliefs about what those experiences mean or what they attest to, but they know they've had these experiences. And what atheists and secularists and scientists tend not to do well or at all is connect to the character of those experiences and give some alternate explanation for them, an explanation that is not entirely demeaning and deflationary and gives some warrant to the legitimacy of the experiences themselves. So an experience, for instance, like self-transcending love, experiencing love of a sort that makes no sense unless you have experienced it. So literally knowing that you could love a stranger, someone you have actually no relationship with, as your default setting. Now, people have had these experiences on MDMA, people have had these experiences in religious contexts, but there are people who have not had this experience, right? It's just a non sequitur when you talk about loving your neighbor as yourself, as Jesus is reported to have said. So if you're someone who has no idea what people are talking about in that area, and you have a lot of Christian talk about Christian love, and the only purpose toward which you can wield your reason is to say all of that is bullshit, well, then it's a totally unpersuasive argument. You need more than that, and I think we can, as a community of reasonable people, marshal more than that in an effort to get people to think sanely about the nature of reality. A question about MDMA, which I have recently touched on. Let me just give a word of caution about MDMA. I haven't been shy about saying that MDMA has been useful to me personally. It was actually the first drug I took that made me realize there was a very different kind of experience a person could have in this world than the one I was tending to have, and so it was incredibly useful for me. I actually think MDMA is not the safest drug in the world. I think there's good evidence now that it's neurotoxic. It's also a drug that can clearly be abused in a way that certain classic psychedelics really can't. It's been many years since I've taken MDMA. And for issues of safety and concern for its toxicity are largely the reasons why I wouldn't take it now. So I don't want you to get the sense that I'm telling you to go forth and roll by the millions. I think while I wouldn't say you should never take it, because I took it and it was incredibly useful, I think it's issues of purity and knowing what you're getting, and even getting pharmaceutical grade MDMA is not intrinsically safe. I think that the jury is no longer out on whether this damages neurons. So, question from Zodarap, I think that's how you would say that, about Peter Singer and vegetarianism. How could one ethically defend eating meat? I think that's the gist of this question. You know, I actually can't ethically defend eating meat. I do eat meat. I was a vegetarian for 6 years and began to feel that I wasn't getting enough protein, and started eating meat again, and found that I actually felt a lot better. So I think it's hard to be an intelligent and active and fit vegetarian. At least it was hard for me. But clearly the way we treat animals, our farming practices, just the nature of what life is like in an abattoir, I can't defend any of that, and I can't defend delegating that. And I would support any effort we could make to make that whole practice much saner and more compassionate. And the moment we had a real substitute for it, the moment we had synthetic meat, say, which is actually something that people are working on, I think we would have an ethical obligation to do that. So it's not, there's a lot to say about the ethics of meat eating, there's a lot to say about the ethics of farming. There may be ways to differentiate among species. You know, if pigs suffer much more than cows, well then we should have much more concern for pigs. I don't in fact know that they do, but there's many questions here. But as a global issue, I think Singer is very often right on the subject. I think it's unethical to delegate something to be done that you wouldn't do yourself for ethical reasons. You know, if you would be horrified to kill an animal and couldn't just never countenance it to get your next hamburger, well then, to have it done out of sight and out of mind is not an ethical solution. Now, it's the solution that many of us still sleep reasonably soundly at night having put in place, but I don't have an argument to support it. Questions of security and my own security, bodyguards. I hear you live in an undisclosed location, travel with bodyguards. The security issue, I don't want to oversell the security issue because I worry that people who want to make similar noises to the sort I'm making will be scared to make them, because they just think there's your life is utterly complicated by having let your reason out in public. Your life can be complicated by doing so. It's not. I take security seriously. I take it more seriously than some people who have similar job descriptions. But nothing bad has happened to me, and nothing. And I don't regret any decision I've made to have the career I've had. So